Hello, and welcome to the Book Speaks podcast, where the book speaks for itself. I'm your host, Benjamin Douglas, and this is the show where each week I read a chapter from a different indie author. Thanks for joining me for today's reading. Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining me today for episode number 29 of the Book Speaks podcast, where the book speaks for itself. As always, I'm your host, Benjamin Douglas, and today I'm going to be reading from fellow science fiction indie author Jeff Tanyard. And I'm really excited about this. I know I say that every week, but it's always true. There's always a new reason to be excited because every indie author is this unique individual. Jeff is someone I first encountered on Kboards, where he's an active participant, active contributor to such important and lofty threads as Caps Lock Wednesday. This is true, actually. But Jeff is just a really good guy, and I realized this when I posted a thread, a couple of months ago now, asking for critique on one of the first drafts of the cover I had made for The Lunar Gambit, the first book in my Starship Fairfax science fiction series. And I made these covers myself. I really bootstrapped it. They're, they're bespoke covers that I'm pretty proud of at this point. But when they began, they were really poor quality homemade things. And Jeff, right away in the thread, gave me some ideas. And then he said, you know what? Send me your files and I'll show you what I'm talking about. And sure enough, we started this exchange via email where he was just like, totally coaching me on cover design, like the typography and the lighting and all this stuff. And I am just so grateful. It shouldn't be, but it feels sort of rare to me that someone in the indie author community reaches a hand out and helps someone not expecting anything in return. Now, I know that maybe is an unfair statement because a lot of people have done that and have stories of people who have done that. But just me speaking personally, I find that while it's a wonderful community to be a part of, it's kind of rare that someone actually just gives of their time with no expectation of compensation. Because let's be honest, we are, after all in this expecting some degree of compensation for our work. That's why we're selling our fiction, not just handing it out or putting it all on Wattpad. So anyway, big shout out to Jeff Tanyard. He's a good guy, cool guy, really, really helped me. He helped me so much with those covers that I even said at some point, hey Jeff, do you charge for this? Or do you want to be credited like inside the book as like a co-designer or like something? And he said, no, I'm just like to help people out. This is not a solicitation for everyone listening to call up Jeff Tanyard with favors. Oh no. But it is a call to action for you if you're listening, and especially if you enjoy science fiction, to support this indie author who's in it with a great attitude and just a real kind of community spirit. To support him by checking out his work. And the work from which we'll be reading today, Clouds of Venus, is book one in a space opera science fiction trilogy called the Free Space Trilogy. He released the trilogy rapid release just, 2 weeks ago, Jeff? Pretty, maybe just a week ago now. Just here in the latter half of September. I think maybe just a little over a week ago. Just one after another, all three right out the gate, hoping to catch some of that Amazon algorithm love. Jeff, I hope you get it. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and read Jeff's Amazon author bio now, as I always do. Jeff Tanyard writes science fiction. He loves space battles, genetic engineering, alien life, and all the other things that make science fiction fun. And that is all he wrote. So, brevity is the source of wit, Jeff. Very, very well done. But if you'd like to hear more from Jeff, you'll be happy to know he does keep a regular blog on his website, and I'll be linking to that in the show notes as I always do, along with a link to his Amazon author page. On Amazon, Jeff has a couple of short stories up, Buddy and Mr. Wilson. These are both science fiction short stories, and he also has the Free Space Trilogy. And I have to say, the covers for the Free Space Trilogy are gorgeous. He didn't make these covers himself. He hired out for these, and they're the real deal. They're slick, professional, good branding. I really hope they do you well, Jeff. Do you justice. Jeff's short stories are both pretty highly reviewed, pretty highly rated on Amazon. The Space Trilogy is so new, it doesn't have any reviews on it just yet. So again, if you're listening to this, just a call to action. Check out his work and leave him a review, because this is a guy who really gives to the community. He's the kind of guy who regularly participates in threads that help other authors, like the Help Me Make My Book Permafree thread, which is kind of a big deal if you're trying to make a book permafree and you need Amazon to price match it. Sometimes the only way they'll do it is if they get enough requests from multiple sources, or sometimes you just have to email them yourself. But Jeff is one of the authors regularly submitting people's free books from other vendors to Amazon so that they'll price match. Again, not expecting anything in return. So I'm going to read the blurb, that is the Amazon book description that Jeff put together for Clouds of Venus. Dale Kinmont is a college student in post-catastrophe America. He's lucky. He lives in one of the walled cities for the nation's elite, and life is pleasant. He expects to graduate and find employment in his uncle's company. Everything changes when he's framed for murder. He's tried, convicted, and sentenced to hard labor in the prison colony on Mercury. He ends up in Hesperus instead, a flying city that soars eternally through the acidic skies of Venus. His goal now is to find a way to clear his name and return to Earth before Hesperus erupts in civil war. He also must battle the harsh realities of the planet itself, because if the Hesperans don't kill him, Venus probably will. Cool. So I'm looking down here at the categories that this book is in, and I'm seeing science fiction and fantasy, science fiction adventure, science fiction and fantasy, science fiction colonization, both for books and for Kindle ebooks. But reading the blurb and reading the first handful of chapters that I've waded into, it really seems to me like Jeff is drawing on some popular tropes as well, and doing a pretty decent job at it, from post-apocalyptic, from political thriller. So there's some real kind of cool cross-pollination of storytelling happening here. Definitely worth checking out if you're interested not just in interplanetary science fiction, but in either of those two scenarios as well. Jeff gave me a little bit of a challenge when I contacted him, and of course he was very gracious about me doing the reading. He said, yeah, go ahead, that's great. The challenge, though, that he issued me was, well, I'll be curious to see which chapter you decide to read, and why. To which I thought, huh? Because I usually just read, like, the first chapter. But then I thought about it, and as I continued to wade into the book, it occurred to me, I'll pick a chapter that showcases a handful of different skill sets that he's using here. So I'm actually going to read the third chapter, which showcases some character interplay, some character development some action, some suspense, all that stuff kind of wrapped up into one. Before I get to that, I want to give one last reminder, a plug for myself, that book 2 of my science fiction series, Starship Fairfax, went live last week. The book being The Hidden Prophet. That's now available on Amazon and in Kindle Unlimited. Free to read in Kindle Unlimited if you're a member. And book 3 is up for pre-order. That'll be coming out in about a month at the end of October. And when that happens, I'm going to do a big free promo push on book 1. So stick around to hear about that, and I'll let you know how things go. Hopefully, fingers crossed, it'll go really well. We'll see. And lastly, I want to remind everyone the reading you're about to hear does not come from an official audiobook, but is, as always, performed and presented here with the author's knowledge and consent permission. Without any further ado, thanks everyone for being here. I hope to see you next week for another indie author reading. And here is my reading today from Jeff Tanyard's Clouds of Venus. Clouds of Venus, Book 1 of the Free Space Trilogy by Jeff Tanyard. Chapter 3, Outside. Iris Leyland was a young blonde woman, average in appearance, but extraordinary in lineage. She was the daughter of Nathaniel Nat Leyland, owner of Leyland Agribusiness. Unlike her father, who was more businessman than farmer, Iris liked to play in the dirt. When Dale and Raynor found her, she was in a cleared area of the woods, clothes streaked with mud, and tending her well-hidden and very illegal garden. "Iris!" Raynor called out, emerging from the woods with Dale in tow. She raised her head and looked around. When she saw the Kinmont men, she waved them over. Dale stepped into the garden and worked his way over to her, careful not to trample on any plants. Raynor had told him about Iris's little secret, but this was his first time seeing it. After a short slog through the mud, he reached her. "Hi, Dale," she said, with a kind smile. "Hey." "Thanks for coming." She glanced at Raynor. "Both of you. I know it's risky being out here, and I'm sorry to drag you into my work, but—" "It's no trouble at all," Raynor said, with an over-eager smile. Dale wanted to roll his eyes, but managed to restrain himself. Sure, Raynor got a little goofy around Iris, but Dale was the same way around Honora Emerson, so he couldn't really make fun without being a hypocrite. He glanced around at the items on the ground. "I guess you want us to carry some of this stuff somewhere?" "That's right," Iris said. "I'd do it myself, but those crates are too heavy. I guess I should have smuggled a wheelbarrow out of Scenic Ridge. Then I wouldn't have to ask for help." Raynor squatted next to a crate full of strawberries, wrapped his arms around it, and stood. He made it look easy. He gave Iris a grin. "Just tell me where you want it." Dale squatted next to a crate and lifted it. It was a struggle, and it took his legs a moment to push him to a standing position. Drops of sweat immediately popped out all over his skin. It was a little embarrassing, and he envied Raynor's physique. He swore to himself for the millionth time that he was going to get in shape someday. Iris beamed. Thanks, guys. This way. She started towards the woods and pointed at a break in the trees. This path will take us there. It's not far. Where are we going? Dale asked between labored breaths. Gableville. Dale opened his mouth to object. Raynor gave him a look and a small shake of his head. Dale snapped his lips shut. Only minutes ago, Jim had told them to stay away from the shanty towns. So much for that advice. I know I shouldn't be doing this, Iris said over her shoulder as she walked. I should be studying for finals, I suppose, but I just can't watch the people out here starve and not do anything about it. I like the idea of helping them, and I've got a green thumb, so I set up the garden. I couldn't tell Dad, of course. He wouldn't have approved at all. Understatement of the year, Dale thought. What about your brother? Raynor asked. Bryce has been sounding more like Dad a lot lately, Iris said, with a note of sadness. He doesn't listen to me like he used to. Best to leave him in the dark. Dale shifted the crate in his arms, hoping to get a better grip. The path through the woods was little more than a deer trail, and the trees and underbrush resisted him. Branches whipped his face and arms, and thorny vines snagged his clothes and scratched his skin. A gap in the forest appeared ahead, and he soon broke into the clear. It was a dirt road, and the shanty town of Gableville could be seen in the distance. He followed Iris and Raynor down the road. Gableville was little more than a handful of structures clumped together where dirt roads crossed. The buildings were assembled from scraps. A gaggle of dirty, laughing children ran around barefoot, flitting in and out of the spaces between the structures in the course of whatever game they were playing. Iris led them over to an old woman with a shopping cart. The woman's wrinkled face broke into a delighted smile when she saw the crates of strawberries. She gestured for Raynor and Dale to put them on the ground. Dale did so, and then took a moment to stretch. His muscles were sore, and his body trembled. The crate wasn't absurdly heavy, but carrying it over uneven ground had nearly been too much. There had always been something else to do instead of exercise, like video games. Now he was paying the price. Thank you, the old woman said. She patted Dale on the cheek. You're a good boy. She patted Raynor's cheek, too. Both of you. If only I was 60 years younger. She grinned. You're welcome, Dale said, with a slight stammer. He wasn't quite sure how to act towards someone like her. He had lived his entire life in a walled city, protected and privileged. She lived out in the wilderness with the criminals and the wild animals. Her life was very different from his, and he was afraid of saying something that might accidentally offend her. She must have sensed his hesitation, because she gave him a sad smile. I used to live in a place like Scenic Ridge when I was a girl. Most Americans did. It was just how the suburbs were back then. It was a great life, too. The country had problems, but it also had a lot going for it. People from other countries actually tried to move here instead of the other way around. But then the nuking happened. The cities were destroyed, the economy was wrecked, and the country never recovered. Well, it recovered a little, but not all the way. She shook a finger at him. Be glad you weren't alive then. Terrible time. Yes, ma'am, Dale said solemnly. He knew his history, but he still couldn't really imagine what it must have been like to live through the nuking. He didn't want to imagine. Ready for the next load, guys? Iris asked with a smile, interrupting the melancholy mood. Sure, Raynor said. He hadn't even broken a sweat. Yeah, Dale said, trying to sound more enthusiastic than he felt. There was some commotion a short ways down the street. The children who had been playing scattered and disappeared. A few doors slammed shut. Hear that? The old woman looked at Iris. Hear what? I don't... Get out of here! Hurry! But Don't argue, child. Just go! She grabbed her shopping cart and scurried away, making a racket due to the cart's loose wheels. A few moments later, the rattle faded away and disappeared, leaving the three young people alone in silence. Dale cocked an ear. He didn't hear anything. What had spooked the old woman? Nothing was stirring. There weren't even any birds chirping or insects buzzing. It was as if all life had gone into hiding. Gableville was a ghost town. He swallowed. That's what she had heard. The absence of background noise, the abnormal silence. It didn't last long. It was broken by the faint sound of a distant engine. We need to leave, Raynor said. His head swiveled back and forth, scanning for threats in every direction. I think you're right, Iris said. Back to the woods. She and Raynor started down the road at a brisk pace. Dale tried to follow. He was already tired from carrying the strawberries, and he couldn't keep up. The engine noise grew louder. Iris had already jogged ahead. She skirted through the edge of the thick brush and disappeared into the woods. Raynor was right behind her. He paused and turned. Come on, Dale, run! Coming, Dale said with a wheeze. The engine noise became much louder, as if the vehicle had turned a corner. Dale turned to look. A pickup truck was only yards away. It barreled towards him down the dirt road, kicking up a cloud of dust behind it. The bed was full of young men. They were shirtless, wore gang insignia, and their faces bore the telltale tattoos of accomplished criminals. Some of them carried guns. Others carried baseball bats, axes, and machetes. Raynor shouted something, but only a part of Dale's mind heard. His attention was focused on the truck. He turned and tried to dive into the woods just as the truck roared past. The last thing he saw was the blur of a baseball bat streaking towards his head. It barely missed. He could feel the breeze of its passing flick his hair. He rolled into the underbrush, bounced to his feet, and charged ahead. Thorny vines and branches whipped his face and arms, leaving thin red lines on his skin. He ignored them and ran. The truck's engine noise quieted. Then it started up again, but it sounded a little different. The driver had shifted into reverse. They were coming back for him. He was tiring, but he dared not stop. He pushed ahead, bulling his way through the thick brush. Visibility was limited to a few feet. He had no idea where he was going. Dale didn't see the creek until it was too late. There was a drop of a couple of feet from the undercut bank to the water. His foot sailed into nothingness, and then he pitched over. His hands flew forward instinctively, trying to break his fall. They splashed into cold water and sank into the soft mud of the creek bottom. Dale's body kept moving forward. The top of his head struck something hard, and then the lights went out.
This concludes another episode of the Book Speaks podcast, where the book speaks for itself. Thanks for joining me, your host, Benjamin Douglas, for another indie author reading. If you liked what you heard, be sure to visit http://thebookspeakspodcast.wordpress.com for more episodes and for links to the author's website and the author's Amazon author page in the show notes. If you'd like to follow me on my own author journey, you can find me at http://benjamindouglasbooks.wordpress.com. And of course, if you're an indie author interested in having your work featured on the show, or if you're interested in discussing having your book read and produced by me as an audiobook, feel free to contact me at benjamindouglasbooks@gmail.com. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you have a productive and enjoyable weekend.